something like that, that's what it's called.
So you have like I'll just say it's all time and that is like lost.
Exactly.
So they got it straight out. There was everything. I'm pretty sure they just reached out. That's right. I think I was still there. I know that for presentations. I know. It's pauses.
Because he's actually helping me have a work right now, but he's actually helping me inventory all of the questions. And the special collections, because we've been going on next. Over the years.
Yeah, they're really cool. Do like a little like what Casey said, but it looks kind of against us a bit.
Yes. I suppose.
Person that stage everything.
It's nice. Stuff. This is of comic book.
Really?
Because they just got a huge donation. Apparently dairy goes to all these, so they're. And then we'll get all of them.
I like that. It's great.
So it's kind of like, it's a bit unusual, but the quick one, and some like the local, and well, there's the
It's great.
it's kind of the.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, so they kind of worky like that, that's unique here. It's
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lincoln Searcy, and I am chair of the Alumni Association here at the College of Coastal Georgia. And this is the Coastal Georgia Public History and Archives. Tonight, we'll have Dr. Hector Mumford and Belinda Gill speaking on a few different things. A little bit about Dr. Hector Mumford. He is an assistant professor of history at the College of Coastal Georgia, where he has taught courses in U.S. history, public history, and American studies for the past 7 years. He is also active in researching and documenting local historical topics. Dr. Mumford earned his bachelor's degree in history and political science from Florida State University, and he has a master's degree in public history from the University of West Florida, and he has his PhD in U.S. history from Auburn University. And coming up after me will be Michelle Johnston, who is also on the board of the Alumni Association.
Good evening. It's my honor to introduce one of my colleagues in the library here at College of Coastal Georgia. Belinda Gill is the Special Collections Librarian, the College Archivist, and an Assistant Professor of Library Science here. And she oversees and manages Special Collections and the College Archives at the Gould Library here on campus. And this is a very broad collection of yearbooks and newspapers and other materials that document our institution's history and tell our story. Ms. Gill is a vital member of a team of librarians who collaborate with faculty and staff across campus to teach information literacy classes. And she also teaches classes where students use items from the college archives and special collections to complete their projects. She started working at the College of Coastal Georgia in January of 2024. Ms. Gill earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and a bachelor's degree in English from King State College, and earned a master's degree in library science and information studies from Simmons College, now known as Simmons University. So now we'll turn the program over to Dr. Mumford and Ms. Gill.
Can everybody hear me okay? So my name is Melinda Gill. I'm going to be starting us off today. I'm going to be talking about our institution's history and the college archives. So a little bit more background about me. As already mentioned, I attended King State College where I earned 2 bachelor's degrees in psychology and English. And I earned my master's degree at Simmons College, now Simmons University. I have also had the wonderful opportunity of working at several institutions that have really helped shape my career and have helped bring me here today. Those places include the New Hampshire State Archives, the New Hampshire Historical Society, New Hampshire Public Radio, Dartmouth College, Keene State College, and also the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. That's a little bit about me. But now, on to our institution's history. So our origin story, I found this story in several locations when I was doing research about what our history was when I first started here back in January 2024. And this story was basically during the discussion on the porch of the old Alderthorpe Hotel that used to be in downtown Brunswick. A bunch of our city leaders were gathered together and they were just kind of having a conversation about what they wanted for the community. And they started to have a discussion about really wanting a college here in Brunswick. And one of these individuals was James D. Gould Jr., and he really became impassioned about this, wanting to bring a college to the community. So he felt so impassioned about this, he actually became a member of the Board of Regents with the sole goal of bringing a college to Brunswick. And he was successful. Our institution was officially established on October 11th, 1961 by the Board of Regents. And actually it was approved because the legislation actually wanted new junior colleges throughout the state, and they actually had made that happen back in 1958. So just a few years later, this occurred. We were originally named Brunswick College for the town, and our institution's mission was to provide free baccalaureate degree programs that prepared students to transfer to four-year institutions. So on July 30th, 1963, a couple years after we were founded, the groundbreaking ceremony actually occurred and construction began. Dr. Earl F. Hargett was named as our institution's first president, and Dr. Pope A. Duncan was named as the first dean on December 11th, 1963, so just a couple months after the groundbreaking ceremony took place. So Robert Warner was the first student to ask for enrollment to Brunswick. He actually asked to enroll before our president was even named. That's how much he wanted to go to college here. But it was actually Anthony H. Armstrong who was the first student to actually finish an application and to actually be accepted by Brunswick College. So classes began, and actually I don't know how many people realize this academic year is actually the 60th anniversary of classes here at our institution. We've been holding events all year to try and celebrate that, and this event today is actually one of those events. Orientation and registration for the first freshman class took place on September 21st through September 24th, and the first day of classes was held on September 25th, 1964, with 266 students in attendance. So Dedication Day. Dedication Day occurred on October 21st. The Board of Regents actually came here to Brunswick, and they gathered in the, what was the time, the Clairwood Gould Memorial Library, and they received a progress report from President Hargett to see how the college was doing after the first month of classes. And later on that same day, a formal ceremony was held, and the main speaker for that event was Georgia Governor Carl Sanders. So our classes began, we started running, but after a year of being in operations, the college already had a name change. We became Brunswick Junior College. That was because it was declared in the state of Georgia that all 2 years colleges had to add junior within their name and titles in some way, shape, or capacity. So Brunswick College became Brunswick Junior College. C-Swells. So C-Swells is our institution's literary magazine. It ran its first issue for the fall and winter quarters of 1966 and 1967. At the time, we were actually on a quarter schedule for classes, so that's why they had the original goal of having a publication every quarter. But then they realized how much work actually needed to be put into creating a publication, and it became an annual issue instead. And it actually is still being published today. There's actually going to be a ceremony soon for the 2025 issue of the Sea Swells. New president. So Dr. John W. Teal became our second president in 1968, and he actually went on to serve to be, at least so far, our longest serving college president. In 1988, we had another name change. The Board of Regents decided that, oh, we actually don't need to have junior in the title for all two-year colleges. So that was dropped, and we went back to our original name of Brunswick College. In 1991, President Teal retired, and then Dr. Dorothy L. Lord was appointed as our institution's third president. And then in 1996, we had another name change. This time we became known as the Coastal Georgia Community College. That was because we were starting to look at expanding our institution, and we wanted our name to properly reflect the community that we were serving. So since we no longer wanted to serve just the Brunswick community, we changed our name to Coastal Georgia. Schedule change. As I mentioned earlier, the institution used to be run on a quarter schedule. However, in 1998, the Board of Regents decided that all colleges were now going to be running on a semester schedule instead. And our new satellite campus, which is the Camden Center in Kingsland, opened in 2004. And again, this was to better serve a broader community and the community down in Camden County. And then we have our last name change, which is our current name, which is the College of Coastal Georgia. This occurred on July 1st, 2008, when we became a four-year institution. However, classes for the bachelor's degree programs actually did not start until the fall semester of 2009. And that was because we needed approval from the Southern Association for Colleges and Schools, which is the accrediting body for the college, in order to start actually offering those four-year programs. President Lord retired in 2008, and then we had Dr. Valerie Hepburn was appointed as interim president, but in 2009, her appointment became permanent. However, just a few years later, she left in May of 2013, and Dr. Aloya became our fifth president in July 2013. But then he left in June of 2017, and Dr. Margaret A. Amstutz served as our interim president for July 2017 to July 2018. And then the next president was Dr. Michelle R. Johnston. She became president in July of 2018. However, she left on May 31st, 2024, after she was appointed president of Georgia Southwestern State University. Dr. Johnny L. Evans was then named as the interim president and took over on June 1st, 2024. However, on January 14th, 2025, the Board of Regents declared him president of the College of Coastal Georgia, effective immediately. And now we are all caught up in our institution's history. So the college archives. I first wanted to go over some definitions in regards to archives, because a lot of people actually don't know what an archive is and what it does. So I kind of wanted to go back to basics a little bit for everybody, because I have college students who come to my classes and they're like, I don't know what an archive is. So archives can actually be defined in multiple ways. The Society of American Archivists uses the definitions written by Laura Miller, and the story behind the book, Preserving Authors and Publishers Archive. So the first definition, the word archives, usually written with a lowercase a, and sometimes they're referred to in the singular as archive, refers to permanently valuable records such as letters, reports, accounts, minute books, drafts, and final manuscripts, and photographs of people, businesses, and government. These records are kept because they have continuing value to the creating agency and to other potential users. They are the documentary evidence of past events. They are the facts we use to interpret and understand history. The second definition, in archives, often written with a capital A, and usually but not always in the plural, is an organization dedicated to the preserving the documentary heritage of a particular group, such as a city, a province or state, a business, a university, or a community. Examples of this is the National Archives and Records Administration in the United States, the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan, the Coca-Cola Company Archives, and the Archives of the Episcopal Church are all responsible for the preservation and management of archives. Third definition, the word archives is sometimes used to refer to the building or part of a building in which the archival materials are kept, otherwise known as the archival repository itself. So the history of the college archives. So records from various departments and offices were sent to the library, and these records were overseen by various librarians from our beginnings in 1960s to the early 1990s. It was in the 1990s that librarian John Kissinger started to put these records into collections, and he created the archives accessioning binder between 1994 and 1998, which kind of kept track of everything that had been donated to the college archives up to that point in time. However, after that point in time, John Kissinger actually got moved down to the Camden Center and running the library down there, but also record keeping laws and procedures for accreditation changed. So records are now kept by offices and departments. However, some donations did keep filtering in, such as additional C-swells, commencement programs, and other items. The archives at this point were overseen by various librarians. The recent history, present, and potential future. As mentioned earlier, I began working here in January 24. So last year, I was really focused on getting the archives and special collections rooms actually physically organized, because materials were just all over the place. You had photographs on top of newspapers, and materials were just kind of all mixed together. So I focused on getting it physically organized. So if anybody came in wanting to see specific materials such as the newspapers or photographs, I could easily find those items. I also started to do outreach with classes, posting on social media, such as I do our Throwback Thursday posts that are on our library social media accounts. And I also celebrated Archives Month, which is in October, with multiple events. 2025, at least 2025 so far, I have kept performing outreach through classes, various forms of media and events. I've started reprocessing the collections that librarian John Kissinger put together in the 1990s. This is just due to the fact that the materials he used are now 30 years old and starting to fall apart. So we're just getting those collections into new folders and boxes so they can keep being preserved. And I'm also creating their corresponding finding aids which are being posted online upon completion. In the future, I want to finish reprocessing the collections created by John Kissinger and process the materials that were donated during the 20XX period, or from 1999 through 2023. I call it 20XX because the materials really were not inventoried as they came in, so we don't know when certain materials were actually donated. We just know that they were dropped off during this ambiguous time period. I also want to digitize our photograph collection and other materials such as our yearbooks, maps, and newspapers to current archival standards and make these items available online. So what actually is in the College of Coastal Georgia archives? Well, the materials range from the early 1960s to present day, which makes sense. Basically, the very first materials that were donated are related to the Board of Regents, what they wanted to do for the school, how it was formed and created. So we have some of those materials. So that's why some materials are actually dated before the college actually physically existed. The materials include paper records from the Board of Regents, various departments, offices, and committees. We have yearbooks from when our institution had a yearbook. We have all of the course catalogs. We have newspapers, photographs, and magazines that were produced both by students and the college itself. And we also have artifacts, otherwise known as 3D objects, in the archives. So altogether, if you actually lined up all of the archival material right next to each other from end to end, it would be 342 feet long, which is just a bit shorter than a football field, which measures at 360 feet. So we have enough material to nearly spread across an entire football field within our college archives. It's actually pretty impressive if you think about that, all that material for our institution's history. Here's a few pictures that I have taken of our college archives. Over here is where our newspapers are kept. Our yearbooks are on the very end. Over here, and this photograph here is the backside of the newspapers, and our photograph collection is kept in all those boxes at the end there. So why is the college archive important? Well, memories are preserved for future generations. Current students are able to look at the archives and they can learn why our institution is the way it is today. Teaching classes and introducing students to the world of archives actually does help introduce them to a new career path that they may not have known about before. So by becoming an archivist and librarian. We have a lot of our American General Studies students end up coming to have conversations to me, and I've actually had one student who came and volunteered with me after her American General Studies class came, and she is now in grad school to become an archivist. Alumni also have a place to leave their memories behind and allows them to reminisce about their time in college. Professors can teach their students that there are alternative ways to conduct research by actually getting hands-on experience with materials and from history. Also, it allows the local community to see how the college has supported the local community, but also allows the college to see how the local community has supported our institution as well. And it truly reflects why there is such a strong bond between the institution and the surrounding community as well. They were very supportive of when the college first came here. They really wanted a higher institution within this community. There you go. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Hector Montfort, who's going to talk about the public history at the College of Coastal Georgia.
Okay, here.
And there's that.
Yep. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Hector Montfort. I will be giving you the second half of this presentation about, in my area, public history, and we'll kind of just get into it a little bit. What I want to tell you today, or talk to you about tonight, is a couple of things about public history. Number one, what it is. Number two, why it's important where it came from, and then how we're doing it here at the College of Coastal Georgia. And whenever I talk about public history and what we do and how we do it, you can't talk about that without talking about the archives, because the archives is incredibly key to not only serving as a place for the research historians and public historians conduct, but also it's a great opportunity for our students in IBIS classes and American Studies classes to have a chance to actually learn what archives is, what it does, and how archivists work. So the better the archives we have, the easier my job is and the better my job is in the process. But again, Landon kind of gave you my background here, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Went to all the party schools in the South. But the one I do want to point out is the one in the University of West Florida. It's here where I learned about public history. It's here where I learned what public history was, where I kind of went to the dark side, as some people call it in the history world, and where I gained really not just a knowledge of public history, but like this passion for it, for something that really sort of like drives my career and my own desire to not only be a historian, but to help my community with their own histories. And so whenever I talk about this, I'm happy I went to all of these colleges and got all these degrees, but I'm really happy to go to the University of West Florida and learn more about public history there. So what is public history? And I have this definition on the board here that comes from the actual National Organization for Public Historians, National Council of Public History. And they define public history as public history describes the many and diverse ways in which history is put to work in the world. I don't know what that means. Because really what public history is, it's hard to explain sometimes. If you ask 6 different public historians what public history is, they're going to give you 6 different answers, quite frankly. The key here, though, is diverse ways in which history is put to work in the world. And what that essentially means whenever I talk about public history is that the thing that I do is try to show people how we use the history we learn in the classroom outside of the classroom. That's the idea. The knowledge we gain, the tools we use, that's what public history is. How do we take these ideas, how do we take these tools and take them out of the box we're normally in whenever we learn about history and put them into the real world? And for me, what that means is that I need to teach the public history outside of the classroom. Most of the public is never going to step into a classroom to learn more about history beyond the high school level. And so our job as public historians is to tell their story, tell the story of American history and local history to folks who aren't going to sit in the classroom and learn more about it. We have to go to them where they are and tell them the stories and get them to learn. That's the idea of public history. And so whenever we talk about what public history is, it's taking that knowledge and those skills, those abilities, as I've already said, and getting them out of school and putting it into the real world. And also allowing our public historians to work in the real world. And I always call it the real world. So some people get mad about that, but I always call it the real world. And the idea is that we use these same skills, not necessarily for the study of history in the real world, but we can use the skills we learn for other jobs and other fields as well. So that is, again, a nebulous kind of term for what public history is. What it does, or we'll talk more about what it does later on, but I kind of want to give you a background. Normally, whenever I talk about public history in my public history class, I give you this long, entire class long lecture about where it came from, the idea of public history. And in truth, whenever we talk about this term public history, we kind of contrast it to the traditional version of history, where you go in and you learn about Native Americans, or you go in and you learn about American history, the Revolutionary War, something like that. Whenever I teach public history, what I'm teaching is not really a historical topic, but how to do something, how to practice history. And as part of that story, what I need to tell my students is where it came from. And I can tell you again, take an entire class to talk about what public history is and where it came from. I'm not going to go back to the 1800s. I'm not going to talk about the split in academia between traditional historians, amateur historians, and things like that, because that's not exciting to most people. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about where public history came from in the 20th century. And I'm going to start by telling you about this first poster that says American Guide Week on it. because public history as we know it today really began in the 1930s during the New Deal. And during the New Deal, what happened, you guys are going to get a bit of a history lesson. During the New Deal, people lost their jobs, right? Historians, writers, newspaper editors, journalists, people who normally work with their hands to tell stories or to teach history lost their jobs during the Great Depression. Well, through programs like the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, the US government put these people to work. And they did various things. Some people wrote plays, some people wrote songs, artists created murals for the federal government. And in one aspect of this jobs program, in each state in the country, the government paid writers to go out into their states, in the small communities, localities of their states, and to take the histories of those communities, and to take those community histories and put them in huge books like it's called the American Guide. Each state had their own American Guide that was all said and done. And whenever you open it up, what you saw were these just fantastical local histories of these states, page by page, about what the history of Brunswick, Georgia was, or Savannah, Georgia, or Macon, Georgia, so on and so forth. The folklore as well, the stories that were wrapped not just in the history of this community, but also like the more supernatural side of things were also included in the guidebooks. And as the authors went out into the countryside to gather these stories, they interviewed a lot of people. And it wasn't the important people, quote unquote, that they interviewed. It wasn't the generals, the politicians, the rich, the elites, who we normally kind of look at in history as being worthy of talking about in a history class. What these folks did was that they actually recorded the lives of everyday people, the working class, the middle class, the poor along the way. So we got their stories as part of the larger historical narrative. And what that does is that it opens up history, not just for the elite, but also for everybody else. It showed that their stories were important too, that things that happened in Washington, D.C. by powerful people were important, yes, but also the things that happened in Brunswick, Georgia, by people just living their lives, that was key to American history as well. What the guidebook showed was that everybody has a story, every community has a story, and that those stories were taken together as a whole. That is really what American history is. That is where the history comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. That's the idea. So we start with that. Now fast forward from the 1930s into the 1970s. I've got two things showing here. I've got the American Bicentennial and a poster for the television series Roots. Has anybody seen the television series Roots? Okay, all right, thank you. I'm glad some people have. If you haven't, it stars Geordi LaForge from Star Trek. If that helps you a little bit. LeVar Burton's his name. I should have used LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow. That would have gone better. Anyway, I'll get to Roots in a second. I'm going to talk about the Bicentennial. Why this is important to the story of public history. Because what happens in 1976 is that the US government celebrates its 200th anniversary. And during that celebration, it was a year-long celebration. We're going to get another one pretty soon. In fact, it's going to be, what, next year, 2026? So we're going to get a 250th anniversary pretty soon. And it might be crazy. We'll see what happens. But in 1976, celebrating 200 years, the country had this huge party that lasted an entire year. All kinds of things were done to commemorate the birth of the nation, its politics, its constitution, and also its history. And what you saw was that a lot of communities wanted to take part in that celebration because what they saw themselves was that we are the American story. We are the history of this country. And so across this land, communities began to look at their own contributions to American history. What did we do during the American Revolution? What were we doing during the Civil War? What were we doing during the Great Depression? Let's get those stories and not only tell the stories, but preserve them for the future. And so the American Bicentennial in 1976 really fostered this flowering of interest in local history and community history throughout the nation. And people also began to become much more aware of their own personal contributions of their families to the American story, to history. That's where Roots comes in there. Whole thing. As this happened in 1776, not too long after, like a year or so later, I think, Alex Haley produced or wrote the book Roots. and it soon became a national bestseller. But more importantly, it also became a miniseries, which everybody watched, 1970, blah, blah, blah. And the story of Roots is a story of one Black family that Alex Haley, his family, was able to document from its origins in Africa all the way through the end of the Civil War to the Reconstruction era. Haley did a lot of research on it, and then they made this show that basically told that story in several, I think it was 4 episodes total. And what it did was that it showed on TV to millions of Americans, because remember, there's only like 3 stations in 1977 you can watch. So your choices are limited. You're going to watch Roots or you're going to watch game shows, right? Something like that. You don't have much of a choice. So you want to watch Roots. And so what people saw was like the story of America through a family and also a Black family, which, groundbreaking in the 1970s America. And that really infatuated a lot of people to learn more about their own stories, especially African Americans who had always kind of been pushed or not really included in all these stories before. But African Americans now really wanted to know where their roots were, where they came from, what their story was. And so through the bicentennial and the popularity of the docuseries and the book Roots, we see Americans as a whole becoming much more interested in genealogy and understanding where they came from and how they contributed to the American story. So that's kind of the background of public history, because it's from that non-academic side of things where people became much more interested in their community's history and their history. We don't care about the college all that much. We don't care about the school part of it. We want to know more about ourselves. That's where public history kind of comes from. We help communities tell those stories outside of the classroom. Where do we work? What do we do? Again, the term public history is kind of nebulous. It doesn't mean one thing. But if you've ever walked into a museum, if you've ever set foot on a historical site or gone into a historic home or watched a Ken Burns documentary, you have engaged, interacted with public history. That is how we tell stories outside of the classroom. We have museums. We have historic sites. We use documentaries. More and more, we're finding things online as ways to kind of tell stories outside of the classroom. And you see here some of those places. Museums, of course, I just said. Archives and libraries. Melinda does not have a history degree, right? But she is, by proxy, a public historian, basically, a very included. Archives and libraries, historical societies, the federal, state, and local government, the National Park Service, public history. The state of Georgia Department of Resources, public history, that's in there, thank you, yes. Even in places like Congress or in the Department of State, they have historians who use their skills for their organization. They're not traditional historians, they're working with their stories for the public. So public historians are everywhere. Corporations, Wells Fargo has an archives. Wells Fargo has a museum. Large corporations like Microsoft have archives and places where they keep their stuff because they want to make sure they understand what a microchip looked like in 1987 as they build something in 2025. So public historians are helping to maintain, to preserve that knowledge for future generations. I personally have worked in museums, I've worked in archives, I've worked in historical societies, I've worked in federal, state, and government. The only two I haven't done are historic sites and corporations. So that's kind of like my experience. Where I teach my students, I kind of give them the perspective from 4 out of 6 of these. It's pretty good. And now, why is this important? Why do we care about public history? And the reason why, from my perspective, is because in a time period where information is so easily accessible and so much of it is wrong, in a time period where we're beginning to distrust people with knowledge, there are certain areas that people still trust even in 2025. And one of those is museums and historic sites. If you look at this chart, this is a chart based on a book called Nearby History that was written in the 90s. And in the book, they took a survey. They surveyed, I think it was like maybe around 1,000 people, maybe a little over 1,000 Americans, about who they trusted to tell them about the past. And each number is a number ranked out of 10. Now, what I've been doing in my classes since I got here in 2017 is I've been doing a similar survey every year, very informal. I just do it for fun at the beginning of the semester to see who students trust to tell them about the past. And you kind of see the numbers here. Museums and historic sites, they basically lead the way in all the categories each year. I've got one from 2019 showing and one from 2022 showing. Museums normally rank pretty high, 8.4, 7.4, 7.8. That's great, because that's where public historians work. So whenever we put future public historians out in the field, out in the real world, they need to be able to tell truthful stories because people depend upon them to tell them about their pasts. I mean, look at high school professors, or high school history teachers. That ain't great. 6.6, 4.8, 4.5. That level of trust is not great. And that is usually what people who don't go to college, that's their history, where they get their history from. So that level of trust is just not there, which is sad. That's a whole other presentation probably. But museums and historic sites, people, the public tends to trust them more. So we have to make sure that our public history, where people who don't go to college are still learning about their past, that they continue to trust those sources. Also, it's important to support public history because it makes money. You can actually get a good job, good, decent job with public history. On the left here, I've got the median income of history majors by career. Public historians are going to follow that education, training, and library statistic, or column right there. This is around 2017. The median average wage is like 50,000 or so, it looks like. Half are above that, half are below that. That's where most of my students who go into public history work with a bachelor's or master's degree. That's where they're going to be at some point, either somewhere in that spot, either making above 40 or 50,000 or below 50,000. But of course, you see the other graphs there that show you can get a job with a history degree, or in our case, an American Studies degree or an IDIS degree. The jobs are out there, and they pay, keep the lights on anyway, at the very least. And if you look over here, museums and economic engines for our state, museums, which public historians operate, bring in $1.6 billion to the state on a regular basis. This is 2017, so I'm sure it's gone up since then. You go 70 miles south of Florida, that number doubles. It's 2 point something. Or no, sorry, 3 point something. 16,000 jobs, pay a lot of taxes, and look at that 89%, regardless of political persuasion, 89% of Americans believe that museums provide important economic impacts back to their communities. So people like museums. That's probably a key takeaway from all of this. One of the areas that I teach, whenever I teach public history or special topics classes, or sometimes just as a component of a normal history class, is something called oral history. And with oral histories, these are something public historians use to gather information. Oral histories are great because it allows us to go out into our community and talk with people who normally don't get talked to tell us about their pasts. The definition of oral history: method of gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. Again, that's a nice technical definition. The idea of oral history is just two people sitting down and talking about the past. That's the idea. I'm going to sit with someone and ask you about what have you experienced in your life. Can you tell me your life story? What was life for you like a kid? What was school like for you? What did you do for a job? They tell me all about that job. Did you serve in the military? Tell me about that sort of thing. We get these individual histories through the use of oral histories that are fantastic because, again, most of the story of the past is told at the high level, politicians, generals, presidents, that kind of stuff. And so we get their story, but we don't get the story about the fisherman or the mine worker or the farmer, the people of that nature. So whenever we gather those stories, we begin to understand like what life is like for most Americans in a certain time period, whether it's 1925 or 2015. And so oral histories are a fantastic way to gather information and to preserve the past. And it's also very effective a way for students to get involved in doing this because they're relatively easy. Once you get over your fear of talking to people, which can be hard sometimes, right? We don't like sometimes sitting down talking with people because it makes us kind of not awkward and nervous. Once you do that, it is really easy to get someone to tell a story about themselves. And so it's a great way for my students to get introduced to preserving history and collecting research. And it shows them a aspect of public history that they probably had never even thought about before. Public history at the College of Coastal Georgia. This is where I really want to hit on as we kind of go through things tonight. The importance of using public history in the classroom here, the importance of promoting public history, not at the college, not just for our students, but for our community. And then also how public history, we've already been using it to actually benefit the community along the way, the time that I've been here. And I have up here a couple of bullets about the idea of like, what we're doing. We're partnering with the community to preserve its past. We're introducing students to the discipline. We're providing students with practical experience, and we're helping local organizations promote their history, their stories. And to go back to Melinda one more time in the library, this is where the archives comes in, really handy. The archives give students the actual opportunity to have hands-on training with using historical documents to tell stories, to do research. The archives is a place where students who are interested in public history can actually get some practical experience working as an archivist. Maybe that's something you want to do whenever you graduate. And so having a robust archives with a lot of collections that we can use to tell stories, to show students how to research, and then to actually allow them to work with to become archivists, learn what archivists do, that's key to having a good public history program on a campus. Value to the students, hands-on experience, it's basically set all this stuff, experience using primary sources, analyzing and synthesizing sources to develop historical projects. If you go into an archives, you're going to be overwhelmed by the amount of information about your topic, most likely. And so you have to sift through the material and find what you need to tell your story. This is a great tool for undergraduates and graduates to have the ability to find the information that they need, especially whenever it's not electronic. And you've got to do it the old-fashioned way by just flipping through it with your hands and taking notes with your pen or pencil. Well, pencil in archives, absolutely. Preserving valuable local history material, students actually get to do that. Students actually get to take part in preserving the past. It's fantastic. They love that. To be able to touch something, to be able to look at it and say, I preserved that, that is phenomenal. That's how you get a student addicted to history. That's how you get a student who wants to become a historian, a public historian along the way. Making local history more accessible, the more we do, the more we collect, the more we are able to give to the public, the more the public has access to, the better off we are. Archives are democratic. They are meant to allow, we are meant to have archives that are open to the public so they can understand their history. There should be, it's not a personal thing, there should be no barriers to going to an archive to look at what's there. That's what separates us from a lot of other countries. Communist countries, authoritarian countries, they close their archives and you can't get in unless you have an appointment or you know somebody. And so our archives in this country are democratic because all you gotta do is say, hey, I want to come to the archives. And we're open until 5. Get there before then, we're good. And again, providing students with opportunities to apply classroom theory and skills in the real world. And here we have some students of mine from a few years ago. You can tell it was during 2020, 2021 because they're wearing masks, but they're at the archives at Jekyll Island. They were working on a project at the time and had a great time doing it. I want that to happen here more often. I want to be able to do that here. I love Jekyll. The archivist there is fantastic and it's a good experience, but to be able to do it on campus, even better. Value to the community, real fast, I'm not going to go through all of these, but really what this does for us as a college is that when we use public history and work on public history projects and use our students and their knowledge to help the community, is that we're showing the community that we care. We're showing the community that we think your history is valuable, that our school with all of these resources are actually willing to use those resources to help you preserve your past, to promote your history, and to tell your story. And we're going to use our students to do it. So it really forms those bonds between the community and between the college that we're always looking for, that we really want to have those ties with not just the city of Brunswick as a whole, but different groups within the city itself or the county itself. Whenever I talk about community sometimes, I mean, yeah, I mean city, I mean county, that kind of thing, but I'm also talking about groups of people like strippers or African Americans or churchgoers, those groups as well. We want them to understand that we want your stories and we want to help you share your stories beyond just your own group with the rest of the community. And so that's the great part about being able to use public history, is that it's something for our students, it's something for the college, and it's also something for the community, all interwoven together like that. Good. I was going to show you some videos, give you some examples of what we've been doing since I've been here. I think my first public history class was in 2019. So a few things we've done doing over the past 5 or 6 years. And what I wanted to talk about first were internships. Getting students into organizations outside of the college so that they can actually learn how to become public historians by doing the job on the job. That's the idea. And we've had luck so far. I've had about 7 interns since 2019 who've gone out and basically gotten jobs / interns at the Coastal Georgia Historical Society, the Marshes of Glen Libraries, and the Glen Environmental Coalition. You might be thinking, well, I know that's a history organization. Library, that makes sense. Yeah, they got history there too. Why do you have an intern going to the Glen Environmental Coalition? That's not a historical organization. And the answer is because public historians have skills that translate beyond history. In this case, the intern who did this, the Glen Environmental Coalition, it's not a history organization, but they've made a lot of history by producing a lot of paper materials like board minutes, reports, things of that nature. And they're basically just stored in boxes in the back room in the offices there. So my intern was able to go in and organize that historical material for them to use in a way that enabled people to come in and say, I'd really like to know what we were talking about in 1987 in this organization. And she was like, well, here's the box with all the years, with 1987, boom, here are the board minutes from that year. And you can find out what we were talking about, what they were talking about that year. So even beyond just the historical fields, you can use interns to gain experience working in actual nonprofit organizations or corporations, things of that nature. So I wanted to play this for you. It's about 5 minutes long. This is the last internship that we did. 2 people, William Ellis and Lauren Sprinkle, who worked in the archives at the Marshall Glen Library. And why I wanted to show you this was because I wanted to show you what a typical intern kind of like is going through in terms of how they view the process and how excited they are to actually be able to do something with their hands in the community. So I'm going to play this, hopefully, and we will go from there.
Here, and I'm studying American Studies with a concentration on history and political science.
Currently, I'm studying American Studies with a concentration in history and poli-sci. I also have a minor in English, or excuse me, I have a minor in writing.
So my ultimate goal is to be a professor, and although I haven't decided on any one program or any one field path per se, I know I want to be somewhere in the American Studies region, so history, English literature, most likely history. And I know that for my CV, I'm going to need to have some more real world experience, in which I was lacking. There were some absences there. So one day during class, Dr. Montford had mentioned upcoming historical opportunities and internships, and that piqued my interest. So I visited with him during his office hours, and he gave a description of what this internship would entail. And I was very eager to start it because it was something that seemed right up my alley. So that's what got me into this internship.
Yeah, when I did graduate school. And I realized that was a lot of very hard work. One of the requirements to be able to get in is usually you have to show off some form of research experience so that you're capable, you're competent, you're interested, something of that vein. And I wanted to explore things that were right in front of me. I talked to Dr. Hector Montford, and I was both at their college. He said that his wife, Miss Esther Montford, would love someone to help him at the library. And I said, that sounds amazing. I love that. I love libraries I always have. And to be able to preserve local history was a really big thing to me. I really wanted to be able to give back to the people around me and be able to offer something. My specific collection focused on the history of the bicentennial. Back in 1976, the U.S. officially turned 200 years old, and the country wanted to celebrate their heritage and their history. Obviously, the Brunswick area was no different, and there were quite a few things that the city did to celebrate. For example, there was a train called the Heritage Special that came through, and it was like a moving museum, and it became like a big thing. They had antique shows. There was a parade for the local veterans. And I basically was organizing those documents and any correspondence between the local officials / bicentennial committee, because there was a separate committee for that, and any council meeting records, any press release forms from the companies that were coming here to help with the celebration. For example, there was a few flyers for flags. There were quite a few pins in there actually, like bumper stickers and things like that, that were for the bicentennial, and I wouldn't stop them away.
I believe it was our second meeting with Hesper Montford and Dr. Montford. They went over the two projects that they were thinking to introduce to myself and William, the other intern, and they gave me a box that collections going out. There was one that we knew for sure revolved around Mod Lot, and it started in 1913. And then there was another one that was about Prince Benjamin, who was an African American man living in 1930s-ish, and had a lot of rental properties. So we knew that going in. So my first task that I did was start organizing all the material. I tried to sort it by names. So I looked at all the Mod Lot ones went here, all the Prince Benjamin, and all of the things that I wasn't quite sure on, I put in a third group. And I quickly discovered that that third group was not related at all to Mod Lot or Prince Benjamin. So it became a three-part collection that I had. So that was the task in and of itself.
So you see through that these students in a one semester, one summer long internship are basically learning what an archivist does. And truth be told, we only spend in public history maybe a couple of classes, like 3 or 4 classes, talking about archives and how they work. And we spend one day in the archives with Melinda telling them more about that stuff. And we kind of toss them into the library, into kind of like, sink or swim type mode. And they always seem to be able to swim. And they're learning skills that they wouldn't really learn in the classroom. They're learning on the job, and they're learning skills that are empowering them to be able to say that I do know what an archivist does. I can do the work of an archivist, even though I don't have a degree or I don't have a master's degree in it. It gives them the confidence to be able to say, I can at least do the job. And for a lot of them, it's kind of their first steps in that direction of learning that I do like history. I enjoy doing this work, and I can actually do something with it whenever I graduate. It's kind of like a light bulb goes off for these guys sometimes. And the best part, and I tell them all the time whenever we do these things, is that whenever you're done with an archival collection, you're going to know something that nobody else knows. You're going to have more knowledge about one specific, sometimes narrow subject than anybody else ever does. Lauren now knows a lot about Prince Benjamin and his ability and his role as a landlord in Brunswick during the 1930s. William knows a lot about the bicentennial of Brunswick now, and he didn't know, and that's good knowledge to have, I guess, in some way. So our interns are getting something out of using public history, and our community is getting something out of it at the exact same time. This is an oral history project from 2019, and this is something I wanted to share with the alumni, because this kind of coincides with something Melinda and I are working on right now, the idea of collecting the stories of our alumni for preservation. And I wanted to show you what one of my classes did. This is a clip, again, about 5 minutes long. We call it Looking Back at CCGA, Kimberly Leggett and Pam Mathis. Their time as both students and as staff at the college. They are one of about, I would say, a dozen interviews we collected back in 2019. I want to show you guys this one, and then we'll move on from there. And I have one more to show you after this. Then I'll shut up. All right. Oh, that's Mr. Griffin. We'll go back to it later. All right, anyway.
The guidance counselor approached me with a letter from the Human Resources Office that they were looking for student assistance for anyone who planned to go to Brunswick College at that time. And so I applied and I got a job, and I started 1 week to the day after I graduated high school, and I was a student worker. And I knew this is where I wanted to come to college. And so that's what drove me here, was I also had a job and was able to get to know a lot of the faculty and the staff before I started my classes that August. So, yeah.
So when did you all begin? I started in February 1978. And I started in the Human Resources Department, combination procurement. Back then, Human Resources was called personnel. Well, when I began in 1978, it was a very small college, very compact. We had a small faculty membership, but then as we grew with buildings and our faculty grew as well. For instance, while I was in general studies, there was a high time we had 150 faculty, but that was part-time and full-time as well. So, and that can keep you busy. So, but yes, it was a smaller unit, and now we have really expanded. The expansion is wonderful, and we offer so much to the community and students as well. See, when I first came here, we were in the process of purchasing what is the bell tower. It is no longer standing, but that is one of the first things I remember. And then, you know, other landmarks, of course, are the gates, the designed gates, and new buildings. Yeah.
I remember when the library had a fountain out front that would work, and it was really beautiful, and it had lights that would shine, and it was a welcoming feature. And then when the library was renovated, I don't remember when they renovated that first time, and that had to be dismantled. And for me, it was one of my favorite things, because it was beautiful, but, you know, I know times change. And then also the bell tower, as Pam indicated, because when I was a student here, the bell would chime, it would chime on the hour.
Yes.
And so you knew if your class started at 9 a.m., if you were not in your seat by the night chime, you know, that was not a good thing. So I really do miss the bell tower. It was just an iconic part of our campus.
And it played Christmas music during the holidays.
And you could hear it around town too. Mm-hmm. Well, we were under the quarter system when I was here, so we came to class a little bit, instead of like 3 hours a week, they were 5-hour classes, and so you had to meet for that period of time. And it was just wonderful. We were very small. We had no campus center at that time, no student housing or anything, so we just basically had the 4 campus buildings, which were called the academic building. And then the science building is what the Jones building used to be called. And then this building that we're in now is the Allied Health building. And it was a small campus, so it was just so easy to get to and from classes, and you had, you still had time to interact with your friends going and coming, And as I said, that bell tower, when it chimed, you need to go have your seat taken in class and,
Yeah.
because we had one professor who would actually lock the doors when it chimed. Because he said, if you can't make it to class on time, then just, you can wait outside, so. Okay, well, back when I was a student here, we had men's and women's basketball. And we had softball. And I believe that that was the only teams that we really had. And so to see that expanding into I don't even know how many teams we have now. I know we have a lot. We even had cross country for a little bit, but the interest just did not get really built up for that, unfortunately. I am not a sports person myself. I can't hit a softball to save my life, but I support it on campus. I had I would say the great honor of working very closely with Dr. Carlton, our athletic director, and his, secretary at the time, Vanessa Bell, and I would work at the ball games and the volleyball and basketball games and sell tickets and help with concessions and things like that. So I got to know the athletes. And we had tennis also, I can say, I'm sorry. And that was wonderful because the majority of our tennis players were from different countries. And so you got to meet people from I can't even remember all the different places, but that was so wonderful to experience just their ways of doing things and just to even talk to them and hear their voices to me was just so refreshing because their accents, and they thought, of course, that I sounded funny too. But that was wonderful. And then to watch our athletic programs just grow and grow and grow. And I think that that's a big draw for our campus. And I wish that we could get a little bit more student excitement about athletics. I mean, it's more than what it was back years ago because we do have more teams, but actually more community involvement with our sports. If we could get them more involved, I think that would be a great benefit.
So in those clips, what we see is that our students were able to gather information about, former faculty, former staff, former students, and to tell us stories that maybe there's a little bit of information about there was a bell tower, but they can give us much more of an emotional account of what the bell tower was to really kind of bring home the importance of that landmark on campus. And so whenever we do oral histories, we can kind of go deeper than just there was a bell tower on campus. We can get the personal memories of that bell tower. We can hear it ring whenever she talks about the echoing of the ring across the community. And so that's sort of like one of the powers of oral histories, is that they really emotionally bring home a lot of the information that we want to use to tell these stories, and also stories that again aren't always necessarily in the books, the history books that we read. To give you an example of that, I'm going to play you one more clip, and I think I'm done after that, so I'll move on. But I want to play you another oral history project my students and I worked on. This is in 2020. And again, this is during COVID. This is before there was actually the COVID vaccine. And so we did things very, very safely as we could. We were in a large room. My students are actually talking to these people through the internet. We're on Teams or I think we use maybe not Teams, but yeah, no, that's right. Zoom. There we go. Zoom. Yes. And you're going to hear me yelling. It's not because I'm angry. It's because I'm like 20 feet away from these people, screaming questions at them so that I didn't breathe on them. So whenever I play you these, I'm only going to play you two. Whenever I play you these, I'm going to play you an interview of a man named Ed Council. He's going to talk about Risley High School. And then I'm going to play you the interview of a man or a woman named Deborah Thomas, who was one of the first female police officers in Brunswick. These are the stories we got from them.
That's correct. My class was the class of 1959. We were the largest class that graduated from Ridgeville High School. And we had dedicated teachers there. The principal was very dedicated. The principal was Mr. Wilson at that time. We used to call him Fritz because he, had about 13 students. And when he walked down the hallway, you didn't hear a pin drop. Because he was heavy, stepping. And, you, really paid attention to him when he spoke because he had a voice that, all he had to do was just open his mouth and you shut up.
Was he nice? Was he nice?
He's very nice, yeah. Mr. Wilkerson was a very nice, gentleman.
In that program, and so they hired her. But outside of grants, outside of everything else, I was the first to be hired for, as a peace officer, or a certified patrol officer, police officer.
Now, do you feel any pressure being that person?
Absolutely. Absolutely, the pressure was there, being able to, because keeping on, I guess, first of all, we weren't a desired part of, they weren't this, it had to be done. I was hired there, it worked out. But, guys had their apprehensions about females coming to work in patrol. And that was funny, I remember one night when I rode with a guy, and I must have been working, around about this time, hadn't been working there about 2 years or so. And I rode with this guy and he said, my wife told me she didn't want me riding with no females in the car. And, but I think it's okay. I think it's okay. Look, it's okay. Isn't it okay? I said, yeah, as far as I know, it's fine. But, and so they didn't just get pressures there weren't pressures that just came from within the police department, but their families had an influence over who they rode with, I guess, or who they didn't ride with, and wives certainly did not want husbands riding with female officers. And here again, I was just saying, well, I even rode back during a time when I came into patrol that Black females could not ride with Black male officers either. And so I was forbidden to do that, and I could only ride with at that time when I initially went into the police department with white males. And so, there were a lot of issues. And then I can remember once, how the public would respond to us, the females as it was, or blacks even. I remember once I was riding with a guy, and Officer Starlin and I were partners for a while. And we were riding together one day, daytime shift, and a guy waved us down, he stopped us. I was driving the car, and the gentleman came to the side of the car where I was sitting, and I was sitting under the wheel. And I was sitting to the other side of me, and clearly the gentleman directed his question to Officer Starlin. And Officer Starlin looked at him and looked at me, he said, look, you have to direct your question to the senior officer in the car, and that's her. And he made it clear that he made it clear that I was senior to him, and that he wasn't going to tolerate the disrespect of Black officers or female officers in his presence. And so, yeah. But then, am I answering the question?
It's Officer Starlin. So she was really nervous. I'm gonna stop right there. Mr. Griffin's a great story, but he'll go on for a while. Hang on a second. So again, with that clip, you see how we can get stories that are not normally told in the history books or even like local history books, we get those very personal stories that sort of, they're just under the surface. So we can unearth those stories for other people to learn and use for their own research. That's some of the beauties of oral histories, and putting the oral histories in the archives for other people to actually be able to access. I have a couple of student digital projects here that talk about the ability to use the internet and use, you know, the digital capabilities of getting these stories out to the rest of to the community, to the world for that matter. You're welcome to hit these QR codes. The last two, I don't want to go too deep in it. Everybody's time. I know we have a little bit more to talk about. I do want to show you one thing. Again, this is where we're, you know, the alumni really come in handy, or really come into the story. If we go to the CCGA Digital Archives, this is our website. My students made this some time ago now. What I want to show you real fast is our ability. Well, actually, let me show you this too, because we got some photographs online, not too many. There's tons more to have. We actually have a baseball team at one point, apparently. So we have this picture of a baseball player at Brunswick. But more importantly, every time I show a student this picture, their mouths kind of drop, because for a while on campus we had a pool. And they're always like, "Where was that pool?" I'm like, "It was in the not most of the Coffin Center." Like, there was a pool there. There was a pool there. And so there's that guy throwing a cannonball into the pool, or flicking to the pool right there, and always just kind of like, I can't believe the school had a pool at one point. But more importantly, I want to show you the lost my space here. Here we go. Okay, back to this, the oral histories. These are the oral histories we have right now. Most of these are faculty and staff. Love to start getting some students to tell their stories too, to put into this thing. We have a dozen so far, but we definitely want to have more as time goes on. And now Ross, and try and do Control W and see what happens. All right, sweet. But yeah, I'm gonna put this back up. Feel free to scan these and kind of look at some other things. We have the Risley Digital Archives, which is Risley's high school, the Risley schools with the Risley name. We have hundreds of photographs from their photograph albums. Those albums were deteriorating. Mental note: never ever do a photo album collection, a scrapbook with glue on pictures, because it will destroy the photographs over time. Never use glue. We also have a couple of examples of individual student projects about segregation on St. Andrews Beach, the Spanish invasion of colonial Georgia. It's very map heavy, some very cool stuff there. And the final thing I want to mention, this is more of a dream right now, a really long-term goal, is that I really want at some point for this college to have a local history research center where we help organizations tell their stories in the community. We use our students to do that. They learn, they contribute. They learn more about public history, and also as a place where we can store these memories of these communities, of these organizations, for long-term preservation. So at some point, hopefully, we'll get this local history research center off the ground. And again, that's where the archives comes in, library comes in, all of this. So that's my portion of the presentation, I think. Yep, I'm all done. Thank you very much, guys.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. Can you all hear me okay? Mm-hmm. So why did we give this talk today? Well, we wanted to give this talk because we wanted to reach out to our alumni community and our community in general, because we would like more involvement in the college archives. We would like starting to get more involvement in Dr. Maltford's classes. We also want to help capture more perspectives, because in particular in the college archives right now, we are very administration heavy, very institutional heavy when it comes to the records that we currently have. We don't have a lot of the perspectives and stories from alumni, from students, you know, talking about their time here and what they experienced, why did they choose to come here, whether it was Brunswick College, Brunswick Junior College at the time when they attended, or any of the other institutions that we have been named, and basically, where are they now? What are their stories now? How did coming to this institution impact their lives? We want those stories, we want those perspectives. So we want to reach out because one second, sorry. Because we want, again, more involvement, more engagement. So how can you become involved? Well, we are happy to announce that for the fall 2025 alumni weekend, we're going to be having an archives scanning event. We are going to ask that alumni bring materials from their time here at the College Coastal Georgia, and we'll be able to scan items for them. We're going to limit it to 10. That way, multiple people have an opportunity to get items scanned. Items that we would like to include would be like photographs, if you have posters from events, if you have club organization notes, if you have programs from events that occurred here on campus. We would like to capture those stories, and what we can do is we will scan those items for you and we will provide you with a digital copy, but we would also ask for you to give a digital copy to be included within the college archives as well within our digital repository. We are asking that you don't bring any yearbooks or student newspapers. We already have copies of yearbooks and student newspapers, so we don't need you to bring those. And we're also not going to ask that you bring any school assignments or syllabi. We're not collecting those at this point in time. We just have limited space. So right now we're really focusing on the like the social aspects of attending our institutions while you were students. So that's going to be occurring during the fall alumni weekend. So pay attention, more information will be forthcoming in regards to that. Donations of items to the college archives. We are working on the official policies and procedures. We're hoping to have them finalized by the fall. But I can let you know at this point in time, we do have very limited space, unfortunately. So we do have to be very selective in what physical items we are able to accept for the college archives. We are looking to include, but I'm not limited to, artifacts. So if you have jerseys, hats, swag items that have anything on them in regards to like Brunswick College, Brunswick Junior College, the community college, any of that stuff, we would be happy to have. We're looking for signed yearbooks, so not yearbooks that are blank. So if you have a yearbook that's full of your professor's signatures or it's signed by one of the college presidents and you're looking to unload it, we would be interested in those. But if you just have a blank yearbook, we have several copies of blank yearbooks. We don't need any more. And again, also programs and posters from events that occurred here on campus, such as if there was a lecture that was attended or a conference occurred here at our institution that students were a part of. We would like those memorabilia. Dances used to occur here on campus, such as the homecoming dances and stuff. So anything related to those events, we would be happy to take on. Anything, again, in regards to clubs and organizations, we would be happy to take on. Photographs, if you have a whole stack of photographs that you have digitized yourself and you don't want to keep the physical photographs anymore, we'll be happy to take those off your hands for you. And again, we will not be taking copies of the yearbooks, catalogs, newspapers, C-swells, or school assignments. Also, I also wanted to note we will only accept items that have no restrictions because, as Dr. Mumford mentioned, as an archive, we want all of our materials to be made accessible. So if you want to donate items but want to put a restriction on it that people can't view it for 10 years, we're not going to take it. We don't have the space to hold restricted items. Okay, So at this point in time, we're gonna open it up for any questions or comments for those here in our audience. Any questions?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
What's the best way to preserve photographs?
So the question was, what is the best way to preserve photographs? As Dr. Mumford mentioned, don't put them in scrapbooks with glue. There are different ways that you can preserve photographs. There are some scrapbooks where you can put the photographs into plastic sleeves. The problems with those, though, is that plastic actually can have an acidity to them and eventually over time could break down. However, there are more and more archival companies coming out where they are actually archival specific, acid free, in order to help preserve photographs or family materials in general. Off the top of my head, companies include like Gaylord Archival. There's the colleges also uses Demco and stuff like that. And then, but if you just do a Google search and do like archival photograph storage, you'll be able to find materials that are more friendly in preserving photographs long-term wise. Unfortunately, now sometimes there are actually a couple of scrapbooks that we actually have in the college archives where photographs and items were glued and taped into scrapbooks, and we cannot get the material off because if we try to peel it off, it's going to unfortunately ruin and rip the original materials. So we'll have to, when we go to digitize those, we'll actually have to digitize the entire pages as they are rather than the individual photos, just because of how they were originally formed and put together. So digitizing is another way to preserve photographs. You can do it with a flatbed scanner. There are small ones that are not too expensive. They can range from like a couple $100 to a couple $1,000. Do what is I would recommend definitely, if you can afford to, get one to digitize your family photographs that way, and just make sure that they are backed up and stored in a few different places, such as an external hard drive, and then maybe also in the cloud somewhere as well. But make sure you have a couple of places where you store it, because in case something happens to one thing, such as if you lose or forget the password of the cloud storage site, or if something happens to the external hard drive, such as, unfortunately, we live in Georgia and hurricanes are a real thing as it's flooding. So if the external hard drive gets ruined in the flood, you have the photographs backed up in the cloud storage. So that's another way you can help preserve photographs, is by digitizing them and putting them in a different format. Yes.
Dr. Mumford. Could we potentially use the Alumni Association board members that are actually alumni right now and kick off the student view? I mean, most of them are faculty and staff right now, but they're for students.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, yeah, that'd be great. Why don't we do that? Sure, we can set something up. Don't know exactly when or where, but yeah, let's start maybe brainstorming some ideas to do something like that. Cool.
And I know we're also going to try and start bringing in faculty perspectives as well. I believe I have an appointment this fall with the retired faculty committee council thing. So I'm gonna be working with them as well to try and gain some of those perspectives as well from our faculty members, our retired faculty members. So that way we can capture their stories and histories as well. So we are trying to make sure we're capturing as many different viewpoints that have been here on campus, and making sure we're trying to gather as much of the collective story as possible, because by just telling one viewpoint or one story, you end up forgetting things or losing out perspectives that are really important to the history. So want to make sure we are trying to capture as many perspectives and as many stories as possible.
First of all, I'm not even telling my age, but I remember going on that train in 1970. I was in Virginia. But the slave narratives, were they part of the WPA?
They were, yeah, so, part of it, Zorba, Hershey, people like that were going out into the community to, 1930, blah, 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 people who had been enslaved were still living. They were older, but they were still around. And yeah, so the slave narratives, which are documents, I don't know how many, but we have hundreds of pages of narrative of the, accounts of being enslaved by people who were actually slaves. The interesting thing about that, though, is a study that was done said that the stories changed depending upon the person who was interviewing them. Yeah, so if you were black as a WPA worker and interviewed an enslaved person, they gave you the honest, like, real story. But if you were white, they kind of gave you a little more sort of like, well, whitewashed, watered down version of it. But they're very, very helpful, very, very useful. For the writers didn't do anything with them at the time. They didn't go in the guidebooks, but the collections they were found a couple of decades later, and historians began to use those collections to do research on the antebellum South and things of that nature. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think we are good to wrap up for this evening. Thank you for attending this event, both virtually and in person. We hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone want to see the QR codes again, just in case you want to check them out? I'll put them back up.